Hey guys, and welcome back. Now, media coverage of the war on the ground was very different compared to what previous wars were like, because now they could see their boys on the ground fighting for freedom. But what they did see was horror. But it also showed that everything the US government was telling its people were lies on how the war was going, how people felt about it on the ground. Stories of people being mutilated, tortured, and even worse. Which not only swayed people away from the war, but also damaged the government's credibility. Lyndon B. Johnson's approval ratings plummeted. Some actions of the Allied forces were also controversial, like the My Lai massacre, which saw between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians and even children killed. The story didn't come out until the very next year. Peace talks between the US and North Vietnam opened up in Paris on May 1968, but only ended up stopping the bombing of North Vietnam. Come the election of 1968, with many twists and turns, Richard Nixon became president. As Nixon came into office, the war in Vietnam was very unpopular and looking more and more unwinnable. So this time, the president kept his promises and the troops were coming home, with the view of letting South Vietnamese forces take over their operations. Ho Chi Minh died at the age of 79 on December 1968. After his death, many generals and ministers of North Vietnam formed the Politburo of the Communist Party of Vietnam to see an end to the war. Unbeknownst to the public until 2000, Richard Nixon sent nuclear-armed B-52 bombers to the Soviet Union. This was known as the Madman Theory. They were hoping to show the world that the US was willing to win this war at any cost. The US and its allies heavily bombed Viet Cong and North Vietnamese positions in Cambodia at the beginning of 1970, known as Operation Menu. North Vietnam invaded Cambodia to aid the communist revolution known as Khmer Rouge, so South Vietnam and the US invaded Cambodia as well. This angered a lot of people who wanted to see the US out of Vietnam, so nationwide protests erupted. 4 students in Ohio were killed by National Guardsmen. The South Vietnamese army invaded neighboring Laos looking to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was known as Operation Lam Son 719, but it was a complete disaster. More controversies about the war opened up to the public in the Pentagon Papers, which revealed top-secret documents which were leaked to the New York Times. Nixon tried to stop their publishing, but the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the papers. Nixon did begin to open up talks with the US's 2 greatest enemies, the Soviet Union and China, in hoping to isolate North Vietnam from its communist allies. The Easter Offensive saw a new invasion from the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army in 1972. This in turn resulting of the US recommencing the bombing of North Vietnam, which stopped the North's offensive. Eventually, after Hanoi and Haiping were heavily bombed at the end of 1972, North and South came to the negotiating table with the US in Paris. In January 1973, Nixon stopped any and all attacks on North Vietnam, stopped conscription, and the Paris Accords were signed, ending the United States and its allies' involvement in Vietnam. All Allied troops were withdrawn by March. The South's economy collapsed, felt by the US Army leaving and spiking oil prices due to the trouble in the Middle East. In January 1974, the North used the dry season to retake much lost land in the South, while the United States was stuck up in the Watergate scandal, ending in Nixon's ultimate resignation. Seeing the limited response from the South, the North pressed their advantage in spring 1975. Poor and confused leadership from the Southern president led to massive gains by the North, capturing Da Nang and many other cities. A stream of retreating Southern forces and refugees headed for the coast. With the South in retreat, the North headed straight for Saigon before monsoon season. A desperate evacuation began of many US Marines and foreign diplomats by helicopter, while South Vietnamese civilians trying to escape were abandoned. On the 30th of April 1975, North Vietnamese troops entered Saigon and raising the Viet Cong flag, and so the Vietnam War came to a close in 1976. North and South would be unified into the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and Saigon was renamed into Ho Chi Minh City. Eventually, all of Indochina would fall to communism, Laos became into the Lao People's Democratic Republic, and Cambodia became Kampuchea. All these governments were performing disgusting crimes against their people. This will not be forgotten soon, or ever. Although it did not have the most casualties, or it didn't change the world as much as World War II, it was hell for and on the ground.